Jericho Brown, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today here at the Missouri Review. We're here to talk a little bit about The Making of the Tradition, your Pulitzer Prize-winning third collection. Our goal here with the Miller Conversations on Literary Publishing is to get under the hood of a great new book and use it as an opportunity to talk a little bit, think a little bit about trends in the publishing industry. So with that in mind, I'd like to start just by talking a little bit about how your relationship to the tradition has changed over the course of the last 5 years since publication. It's had an incredible reception and an incredible life, and I'd be curious to hear you talk about your own relationship to the book.
When I think this is the case for any poet. We write a book, we hope somebody prints it, it gets printed, and then you run after it for a year or two. And so my relationship to it at first was just that I was to service it, that I had made a book that I was that I had confidence in, and therefore should be reading from it everywhere I could possibly read. The experience of writing the book helped support that because I loved writing. I loved writing the tradition more than anything else I had ever written. Like, I loved every moment of it. I was excited and scared and exhilarated and anxious and tired all the time. I was exhausted, but it was my best friend. So I went from servicing it and doing all the work of promotion for it to just missing it a great deal. The book came out in 2019. I had a lot of health issues in 2020, and as you know, we were all, well, maybe not we were all, probably me less so because I live in Georgia, but I was quarantined, as it were, because of COVID. And I just never went anywhere that year after March started. And I just missed writing my book and tried to write and was not very good at it because I was also in a lot of physical pain. And then I would say that since that time, I think once I got over missing it, I really just have wanted to make something that is definitely not it. And that's the most I can say about my relationship to it. I love the tradition. I do. I had a great time working on that book. It was like my best friend for a few years, But I feel like I have to let my best friend move away, or, I'm still in contact, even just by the fact of this conversation, but it's not, I don't have to talk to the tradition every day on my own. I would actually rather not. The more I forget about it, the better it is for new work. And I'd love to be making more new work, so.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you missed it after it came out. Was it hard to finish? Was it one of these books where you had to keep writing into it, or you felt like you couldn't put it down? Or did you know when it was done?
I wrote most of it in a matter of a few weeks, or at least half of it, I would say, in a matter of a few weeks. I was writing poems for it since, the book before the tradition must have come out in 2014, and as I am a very slow writer, I was just sort of writing poems. I was writing every day, but having a successful poem or a poem that I thought of as done or finished every once in a while, and I was okay with that. As a matter of fact, I was having, in my mind, I don't think it was the case in his mind, but I was having little fights with my editor at Copper Canyon, Michael Wiegers, about this, because he would call me and he would say, hey, if you've got something ready, we need to start seeing if we can slate you so it can come out in 2019, at which point I would be like, there's no way I'm gonna have a book. There's no way I would be ready to have a book come out in 2019. It just wasn't, given the writer I am, that wasn't a possibility. Mm-hmm. And so I would tell him that many times in a row, because he would call me, which is very lovely for an editor to be doing that, I understand, but it was also stressing me out and making me feel unproductive, because it was as if this person who kept asking me for work. I couldn't supply the work, and therefore I felt like a failure. And I don't need to feel like a failure just because I haven't finished a book. Like, that doesn't make sense. And so I remember the last of these conversations we had was in October, and I said, you have to stop doing this to me, Michael. I'm not gonna have a book. October of, I would say, 17. I said, there's no way I would have a book by the time I would need a book in order for it to come out in 2019. So you have to stop doing that because it makes me anxious. And then I wrote the tradition I wrote half of the poems from the tradition from, I would say, Thanksgiving of 17 to Martin Luther King Day of 18. And I couldn't stop writing. And this is what it's like the dream, it's what you want. It's, I was writing on elevators. I was pulling my car over to write poems. I was getting whole entire poems in my dreams. And then I would wake up and I could remember them and get them down. You know what I mean? I would, if I could sit down and if I had my phone or if I had pen and paper or if I had my computer, I could write a poem if I just had a little bit of silence, It was very strange, and I was sleeping very little during that period. I remember at some point around Christmas in MLA in January, I had the flu, and I very distinctly remember trying to write while also feeling like I was dying, but thinking, oh, well, I guess I'm gonna die, but I got a poem, so I was sort of excited by my own lore. Like, I'll be dead, but there'll be this poem next to me, and people will find it. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And was there a precipitating event that brought out that outpouring, or?
I just think I was experiencing the right amount of art. And then I saw Moonlight, the Barry Jenkins film, which was an adaptation from Terrell Alvin McCraney's play. I think seeing that movie changed my life. I was 40-something years old, and I was watching the film that is, since that point, my favorite film. But you don't imagine that you're gonna have a favorite film after a certain age. You think things are set. Do you know what I mean? My favorite color changed too. It used to be orange, but now it's yellow. But you don't imagine that those kinds of things can change after a point. And because I saw that film and I felt like that changed, I understood there's like a door opened in my mind, and I could walk through it. I walked through it because I understood the expansiveness of poetry in a way. Like, oh, there are other things I could be doing. And because there were other things I could be doing, I just started doing them. Inventing the duplex, for instance, isn't anything I would have done before that point. But because I had this sense of the expansiveness of poetry, I thought, oh, I can invent a form. I just felt like I could do anything. And because I felt like I could do anything, I did anything. And I didn't, generally, as a poet, I don't mind failure. I think that's how you make you don't have a poem unless you fail, but you don't fail unless you try. Do you know? It's like you don't succeed unless you try either. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? So all the poems you ever write lead to the poems you ever write. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I just, I managed to finish this book just because I was trying things and just because I could. Mm-hmm. And because I didn't have I generally just don't have a feeling about time. I don't think things take too long. And I don't mind that they take a long time. I've never been in this business expecting to be a poet who had 20 books by the time I die or something like that. I love books of poetry, but I think of the poem as the achievement much more than I think of the book as the achievement. Mm-hmm. So I don't get excited about, oh, I have 3 books. I'm gonna have 4 books, and I'm gonna have 5 books. It's like, oh, now you got 5 books, so? people still treat you like shit. That like, do you know what I mean? Yeah. So.
Yeah, I love that thought that the poem might be the achievement we shoot for rather than the collection. And I also love that, a movie, something that isn't a poem, opened you up to the possibilities of poetry. That's a really kind of beautiful way of putting it, or discovery, I guess.
Yeah.
And maybe we could shift to talking a little bit about, again, I'm interested in the reception of this book and what's happened after its publication. And it obviously won a Pulitzer Prize, and that's a major achievement, and it must have been life-changing in a lot of ways. And so I'd be curious to hear you talk about how your sense of yourself as a poet has, or was changed by that win.
I don't know if my sense of myself as a poet changed, but my ability you can just ask for more money for things, and that is good. That's not a bad thing. There's this whole thing about how money doesn't make you happy, and it doesn't. But it does make you more comfortable in the meantime. Do you know what I mean? The trouble with being a poet, maybe this is like the trouble with capitalism or something, but if you're doing the things that you can make money doing as a poet, that means you're probably not actually writing a poem. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're writing some article for the New York Times, or if you're giving a reading, or if you're teaching at the prestigious writing conference, you get paid more money, but you were working in a way that was not the writing of poems. You were working, ultimately all those things do go into the writing of poems, yes, and yet it's not the act itself. So I don't know if it changed anything about the way I'm a poet. I think the only thing that's ever changed the way that I'm a poet over the years is other books of poetry or other pieces of art, usually a film, often things that I take the responsibility to experience, like going to the Biennale in Italy, in Venice, and looking at all the art there really did shift my thinking about poetry, and it changed the way I write. But I don't think a prize could do that for me, because I love prizes, don't get me wrong, and I love everything that comes with the prize. I love that y'all asked me here partially because I won a prize. I get to see Mark, you know what I mean? Like I get to hang out. So I'm all for it, and don't ever stop giving me prizes in life. Like I want all the prizes. I don't see anything wrong with that. Why not? But I don't trust them as some kind of a marker of, I think they're good as recommendations go. But that's about all they are. And a Pulitzer Prize is a recommendation. It's a commendation, but it's also a recommendation to history. Like you might want to check this book out, right? If you get interested in poetry, here's a whole list of poems going back from the early 1900s, and you can check them all out. Do you see what I mean? Is the way I think about the Pulitzer Prize. I have to think about it that way because while I am grateful for a Pulitzer Prize, I know that that list includes books I don't like because I've read them all.
Oh, you have?
Yeah. I always wanted a Pulitzer Prize since Rita Dove won one. When Rita Dove won a Pulitzer Prize, I didn't know what a Pulitzer Prize was, but every teacher in my elementary school wanted me to know. Like I came to school and my teacher said, "We just want you to know Rita Dove won the Pulitzer Prize." And soon enough, there was this life-size, I remember there was this life-size poster of Rita Dove in my elementary school because she was like a black lady who won the Pulitzer Prize. Do you understand what I mean? And my teachers understood that I liked writing, and they thought that something about that fact would excite me, and it did. It made me think, oh, I guess that's what I'm supposed to be doing, is winning a Pulitzer Prize. So get thee to it. How do you win a Pulitzer Prize? By the time you're in graduate school, if not college, you sort of understand, well, one idea might be to read the books that won the Pulitzer Prize, right? And be frustrated with them, right? Be honest with them, like mark what you like about things and mark what you don't. But that doesn't mean you ever write toward you can't write toward a Pulitzer Prize. You can't write toward anything. I mean, it's really, people don't know how impossible this is. I guess you could write toward, there is a thing you could write toward. Like you can write toward representing yourself with a certain politic or philosophy. You could do that, I imagine. But I don't think you can write toward a prize. I don't think that's possible.
What do those books share on the Pulitzer Prize list? Do they have any common qualities?
No, I mean, for a long time, they're all like by white men from Massachusetts or somewhere in New England. So they share that. There's a lot of cold weather. So they have that in common. But other than that, I wouldn't say that there's a thing I feel is necessarily in common.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can zoom out for a moment and talk a little bit about craft. You mentioned the duplex. This is a form you've invented and has had an incredible afterlife. I come across examples of the duplex in my role as an editor for the Missouri Review all the time. They come in through our submission queue, often without any mention of your name. So that it suggests to me that people are writing duplexes as they would write a sonnet or a villanelle. And I'm curious, in your opinion, what do you think is compelling to people about the form, and how are they inheriting it? Are they inheriting it in the right way, or is there a right way?
I don't know what compels other people, but I'm always just taken by the sound of the poem, the literal echo of the repetition, and the ways in which that echo through variation can change. I love forms with repeated lines, pantoums, villanelles, and I love how you see a poet repurpose a line, change its meaning. Though you're hearing the exact same words or a variation of a line, you see it in a different way because of what's come before and what's come after. And that's always been the goal of the duplex. And I think that's something you hear and feel because of hearing it, even if you're not hearing the poem read to you or not reading it aloud. There is something still heard in the repeated line, in the repetition, in the refrain, that amounts to the fact of song. And I think that, that's what I like about the duplex, and that's what I like about a lot of poems, period. So I'm hoping that's what people are interested in. I also think that there seems something challenging about it, and poets are still, they're my family members, they're my brothers and sisters, they're my friends. I love poets. They're my favorite people on earth. And we might be the last people left who like a challenge. We like a challenge. We don't mind a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of formal challenges, are there any forms invented in the last half century or so that you particularly admire and maybe write within?
No, I write other forms. I've written, the tradition, for instance, has a bop in it. It has a golden, invented by Alpha Michael Weaver. It has a golden shovel in it, invented by Terrence Hayes. And when I find out about new forms, I try to write in them just because that's what I think I should be doing. And because I might end up with a poem. And every once in a while, if you try to write in a form, you end up in a poem. Maybe you don't. Maybe you end up in a failure. But you can't imagine. I don't imagine that didn't help me, or at least create for me a line. So when I'm working on poems, Kylan, I'm a poet, so I write bad poems all the time, literally every day. Like if there are 365 days in a year, you can probably subtract the number 12. That means, what is that? Like 344. There are 344 bad poems that I've written, and 12 that are like either good or workable. I'll see what's up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like a poem a month. Does that make sense? So, but here's what I imagine about myself, and really any poet. If you write a poem every day, it is impossible to have those failures without at least one good line. If you have one good line, in 365 poems. That's 365 lines.
A couple of poems in there.
Yeah, like that's, I mean, ultimately, what do I need to do other than take the good lines, put them in a Microsoft Word document, and move stuff around until I end up with a first draft? Do you understand what I'm saying? That's a bunch of poems. It's just that you don't get to look at them that way until the year's over. In the meantime, you're just like, well, I'm flailing. Do you understand what I'm saying? But after a point, you have enough mess. You gotta have a mess. You gotta have, I mean, I do anyway. Other people, I think, I remember when we were in school, there's this writer, his name was Aaron Crippen, and we were talking about how we write. And he would write a line, and he would think of the next line, and then he would write the next line. He would sort of work on the poem line by line, like sort of perfecting lines as he went. I don't write like that. Like, it's a mess. It's a horrible, horrific mess. And I sort of do the shaping all at once after I have a bunch of stuff.
Could you say a little bit more about your process? You just described Aaron Crippen's. How would you characterize yours beyond that mess and then shaping afterwards?
There are many ways that I'll come to a poem. For instance, I'll take a poem, usually a poem that people are, if it's short, it's harder when it's longer, but if it's a short poem, usually a poem that people like, that I don't. A really good example of this is Yeats's Leda and the Swan, which kind of gets on my nerves, but that I'm supposed to like. Do you know what I'm saying? Or To Speak of Woe That Is in Marriage by Lowell or something like that. It kind of gets on my nerves. Like, okay, do you know what I mean? And then I write the opposite of every word in the poem, and then I end up with a mess. But the mess has words. And when I say the opposite of every word, I mean even the opposite of words like the. What's the opposite of the? I'm making it up. Do you understand what I mean? After I write the opposite of every word in the poem, which brings me to a better appreciation for this sort of historical thing. Like, I have an understanding of its syntax, and I probably like it a little bit better once I've done that. But then I can throw that away, which is what I really wanted to do. And then I have something that doesn't make sense. But I do what we do as human beings when we look at a mess, whether in none of us, I mean, not none of us, some of us, I mean, but I'm not a visual artist. I am not an art historian. And yet, if I see a piece of art that is abstract, I still say, this is about, in my head, and that's what human beings do. I mean, we do that if we see two people across the way talking to each other. We start imagining what they're saying given their gesticulations to one another. Do you understand what I mean? So I look at that mess and I say, okay, oh look, here's a line, or here's a thing, or why would I say that? Or, another thing I might do is I take, for a while I was really angry with the New York Times, and I remember I told a friend of mine, every time I read an article in the New York Times, by the time I get to the fourth word, it's racist. And so I took the fourth word of not every article, but these particular articles I was reading in the New York Times, and I just put all the words on a Microsoft Word document. Then I threw the articles away. Now I got a page full of words, 3 pages actually, full of words. Mm-hmm. Now I see what I can do with those words. I get a line, or I overhear somebody say something, I write it down in the notes app of my iPhone, and then I end up with all of those, and then on Sunday, I dump them all into a Microsoft Word document. And they have come from everywhere, people saying everything, me thinking of lines that I can't really service in that moment because I'm in the middle of a conversation and I sneak to write this line down that I just thought of. Mm-hmm. But I take all those lines and I put them in a Microsoft Word document on Sunday and I say, that's my poem. Now I gotta work on it. So I take what I think of as the strongest line and I put it at the bottom. Take what I think of as the second strongest or second most unique or second weirdest line and I put it at the top. And I arrange everything else associatively. And then from there, I make a decision. I ask that questions, like, who is your speaker? Where are you located? Why are you so mad right there? Do you understand what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then I end up with poems. So that's my process. I mean, and then I also do what most younger poets are doing, and that is, I get a line and I push, like I'm having a baby. You get a line and you're like, oh, I got a line, and I don't have anywhere to be or anything I got to do, and I just typed the line, and so now I'm going to type a second line, and now I'm going to type a third line. I just don't wait, though. I don't look up at the ceiling. I usually write a line, and my goal is, if I write a line and I think it's strong, to write another line that subverts it, and then write another line that subverts that, and but as I go, where the only thing I might have in common with a writer like Aaron is that I am thinking as I go about sound. If I make a sound in a line, I want to say a thing that subverts it in the next line, but I want to make the same sound I made in the first line. Mm-hmm. And in the third line, I want to make sounds that are similar to the sounds I made in the second line, but I don't want to say what I said, and I don't want to agree with what I said or prove what I said. As a matter of fact, I want to make what I said seem silly. Mm-hmm. I want to subvert it.
Why are you subverting each line as it comes? I mean, what are you gaining from that, and what do you hope for the reader how do you hope the reader to experience that?
I just want to be awake when I read poems. I want to feel like I'm alive. I want to be aware of myself. I want to get excited. I want to throw a shoe. One mark of, maybe this is a thing just like in the Black community, but when a person is speaking, or when a preacher is preaching, or when a poet is giving a reading, one way you know that they're really doing something is people start throwing things, which is so interesting, right? Like, you would think that would be bad. Or if people are sitting behind them, they'll start hitting them in the back. Like, it's all very violent now that I think about it. And so I guess what I'm thinking is that when I'm writing, I have to make that feeling happen. The same feeling I want when I'm reading is what I want when I'm writing. I want to stay awake. I want to be alive. I want always to be surprised. How do you surprise yourself? Mm-hmm. And so that's ultimately what I'm asking over and over again as I write a poem. And that's why, you asked, like, what does that serve? I hope that's what it serves, that it serves surprise, that it serves newness, freshness. Wow, I'm awake, that you wake up over and over again. And by the time you get to a last line, you are wide awake. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So I also am a person who believes in line. I'm saying that because I don't think that's necessarily something we are thinking about as much as a community. So I feel, honestly, in the minority at this point as it relates to line. And I feel like I'm a standard bearer. Like, I feel like I'm a person who, everybody's got their thing that they need to be doing because all of it makes what our big idea of poetry is, right? And my thing that I need to be doing is writing lines and believing in the line as the unit. And if I believe in the line as the unit, if I've got 14 good lines, they don't need to have anything to do with each other in order to be a sonnet. Mm-hmm. Because they're 14 good lines. I just need to put them in the right order. Do you understand do you follow what I mean? Like, if you got a conglomeration of good lines, you should have the accumulation of a good poem, is what I think, right? There's problems with that because it makes me prejudiced against the prose poem, for instance. But it's a prejudice I admit.
Two poems I'd like to gesture towards next. We've got the tradition, the title poem, and another poem that kind of comes near the beginning of the book, 4 Day in the Morning. Both of these poems draw on gardening imagery to think about the politics of tending the land as an African American. We leave things green, you write of Black men and women. Could you expand on this line in light of ongoing discussions about race, nature, nurturing? And when I list that, I think of an anthology that came out about 10 years before yours, Camille Dungy's Black Nature, 4 centuries of African American nature poetry. Do you see yourself as entering into that dialogue, as participating in that dialogue, and how would you characterize your contributions?
I thought that the tradition was I think that book is, I mean, there are those two poems, but I think the book is a pastoral. And that's what I was trying to write. You know, I mean, ultimately, I'm Black, so I would love, I mean to write poems about trees because poets do, and I think trees are dope. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean to write poems about flowers and birds because poets do. I mean to write poems about nature, flora and fauna. Like, I mean to do that. I mean to make use of that. And I don't think that's special. I think poets do that. I just think that if you're Black and at all aware of history, when you're writing about a tree, you don't just see the tree. You also see, I mean, you know that your ancestors have hung from trees, have been lynched, you know? So it comes up. It's not gonna not come up. Just because I start with a tree doesn't mean the lynching is not gonna come up. Just because I start with the lynching doesn't mean the tree's not gonna come up. So, I don't know, maybe I don't know I mean, there are poems that don't have nature in them per se, but I don't know who's not, right? I don't, like this whole thing about this, like, I mean, I'm not trying to be like glib, but you know, where isn't the echo poem? Like, I don't know where, do you know, I just don't know where it is not. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess the Futurists or something. I mean, I'm from the South, and because I'm from the South, my education, I later found out, there was a bend toward the agrarians. Like, I know more about certain poets than I do about others, just because of where I was educated. And I'm, you know, I grew up in the United States. I grew up in the South. I grew up in Louisiana, because my ancestors were imported here as if they were goods in order to pick cotton. And I think, Kylan, it's just you asking me this question. I'm having so many conversations with people, Black people in particular, and many queer people, many trans people who are my friends, many people who are performers. I've had a lot of conversations with people who are trying to figure out where to go because they don't imagine that they should stay here. And I think this is very serious. I mean, maybe you're having these conversations too, I don't know, or maybe you're overhearing these conversations. People are trying to figure out like how much of an exit strategy should be in place. Is it too late? Is there a point where you won't be allowed to leave? Do you know what I mean? And I am very frustrated by that conversation because I think one of the things that my poems, whether I tried to make them about this or not, but just seeing my own poems in the world and reading them or understanding what people think when they think about them, my poems seem to say over and over again that you know, this is my shit. It's mine. Just as much, if not more than anybody else's, because of the way I had to come to it. It is my inheritance. Do you know what I mean? Mm. It's my fucking country. Do you know, it's mine. Do you know what I'm saying? And that starts at the level of the land. That is literal. It's mine. It is my family's, not like, not, it's, and I don't even mean that I mean, I do mean that, like it's black people's just as much as it's white people. Yeah, sure. But I mean, it's my family's. Do you know what I'm saying? To do with what we want. And ultimately, all my family ever did was, plant the food they, grow the food they ate. You know what I mean? And have a yard my dad would call Purdy. I remember we would do the yard when I was a kid. That's how my dad, this is what my dad literally did for a living, was landscaping, mowing lawn. Like I grew up doing this kind of work. And we would drive away from yards that we were doing, or we would have to, because of the route, pass by yards. And I remember sometimes we would get back to our house. Like as the sun, I'll never forget the memory of this. You get up on a Saturday and you do your own yard, and then you do whatever you're doing. And if you're coming back home with your Saturday, right? If you're coming back home and the sun's going down and you're looking at your lawn and it's cut, you got a nice little edge against the driveway. You know what I'm saying? And we would drive back, and passing our house to go into the driveway, my dad would say, "Woo, that's Purdy." He would be talking about what he did. He would be talking about what I had done that morning. Do you know what I'm saying? That's mine. So why is that in my poems? Because it's who I am. And that's all a poem should be.
Well, that response really clarifies, I guess, the title of the book to a certain extent too, right? It's a book thinking about tradition, all of those traditions, right? The literary traditions, the national traditions, the traditions of tending the land, that sort of thing. And that also makes me think of the way that you compose poems, right? Like you're taking Leda and the Swan and taking what you will from it, and then throwing it away. I think of a term from the theorist Jose Esteban Munoz, who I think described this as he called it disidentification. And I wonder if you have anything to say about that, or if that feels like a term that can apply to what you're doing with various traditions.
I don't know this term actually, but I do think of disorientation when I am writing, and I am attracted to that in other people's writing. This song that Roberta Flack sings, Roberta Flack, who died very recently. My attraction to Killing Me Softly is, for instance, that verse in and of itself, which sounds crazy. Do you know what I mean? Like we sort of take that for granted, but that's not cliche. Killing Me Softly is not cliche. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, it might be now, but we were actually, like, we are this close to its origination point. Do you know what I mean? Like, she says in that song, I heard he sang a good song. And when she sings that as if that is vernacular. But that nobody talks like that. I heard he sang a good song. What? Do you know what I mean? So that's sort of what I'm after when I'm writing poems, something where the language, while I am under the impression that I understand it, I am also under the impression that I might not, which I think has a lot to do with negative capability and being being comfortable in being comfortable in ambiguity. And I think that is indeed the case. I mean, I think that's how my poems end up being made, or part of what I want from poems that I'm reading, because in many ways, yes, that is my relationship to much of the facts that I live through, including the fact of my nation, the fact of my citizenry, the fact of my presence in my own family, like as a queer person who, my family actually handles this a lot better than I expected. But I mean, there's only been so much violence, there has been physical violence, but I thought somebody would be dead I understood that I was into guys when I was like 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years. Like I got it when I was in elementary school. And so, which meant I understood that I was growing up in a family that did not want me and did not know they didn't want me. And so I was always growing up undercover. So yes, I am taking the facts of my life and owning them, and in many ways embracing or learning to embrace them in order to make the poem happen, which is why the poem has to be, which is why poetic language must be, for lack of a better word, off kilter in the way that I mean.
Maybe say a little bit more about how your new poems are carving out new territory potentially, as compared to the tradition.
Yeah, I didn't talk about the new poems, maybe because I haven't, I'm working on these poems in such a different way than I've worked on poems before, maybe because I feel privileged or free to do so, where I just work on them. I used to have sort of a very set and stringent way of working on poems, a set and stringent time of day that I worked on poems, a set and stringent, like I'm very, I can be, what is the word that I used to be that I would like to believe I'm not anymore? There's a word and it's not coming to me, where you're like, it's this way or no way at all. I'm like that.
Rigid.
Or I can be. Rigid. Yes, I'm rigid. I'm rigid. I am. I'm so rigid, bro. Like, you would not believe how rigid I am. Like, particularly as a poet. Like, man. And as a teacher, which drives my students up the wall because they're like totally unprepared for it. They're like, wait, we have to actually turn our assignments in on time? Wow. Wait, you're like failing me? You're failing me in a workshop, Dr. Brown? Whoa, bro, like seriously, you know what I'm saying? So I can be very rigid. And I think I'm just less so. I was doing this thing for a few months where I would write a poem and I would only work on that poem until I felt satisfied to put it down. And then I was doing a thing for a few months where I was writing a poem and then not looking at it ever again. I do think it's a good idea. I mean, in my most rigid state, I write a draft of a poem and I put it away for 30 days and then I look at it again and work on it. And if you have enough stuff backed up, that's really easy to do. And I think that's the way to write, but I haven't been rigid. Just because I'm in I don't want to do a thing. I don't want to be in the mode of feeling like, oh, I better make a book. And I'm really refusing that in my action right now. I think, my first 3 books are rebellious in nature, and I'm maybe not. I haven't found the language for whatever rage I feel in this moment. I have many poems. I have some that I like, but I just haven't thought about putting them together. I can tell you some of the things that they have in common because this is what you're asking me. Well, I'll say it this way. I am either writing. This is good because if this comes out, nobody can steal my titles. I am either writing. I'm sort of like, if I come up with a title, I'm more likely to sit down and print everything and say, oh, this is the thing. Like if I print everything and I start looking at it together, then I end up writing a book. But right now, I'm like printing poem by poem. I'm not looking at poems next to each other. I don't care. It used to be, if I had, I would say, 40 to 50 pages of poetry, I print that and I look at it and I say, oh, okay, what's left? What do I got to do? And I think there's something about our industry as well as our institutions that train us toward that. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. It's just that I don't want to do that right now. I don't have to. I don't feel like I need to. So now I probably have many pages that I have not counted. And I think I am writing a book about black men. I thought I was writing a book about kindness, and in many ways I think I still am. And when I thought I was writing a book about kindness, the book was called Remote Control, because I imagined myself writing something about what it means to be social or not, particularly post-COVID. Like what it means to have interaction, what it means to have a deep conversation with somebody one time. And now I seem to be doing that same thing, but that is focused more on the men in my family and the men I encounter and the men with whom I make love. Do you know what I'm saying? And they're all black. So, so I either am writing a book called Remote Control or I'm writing a book called Blackmail, but I haven't figured out which is happening.
You were talking about holding off or postponing that printing stage where you've printed out the pages and started to arrange the poems. Tell me a little bit about what happens when you're doing those arrangements. How do you go about ordering your poems or organizing them? What kinds of arcs are you hoping for when you're in that moment?
I just this is historically, if I have 56 pages of poetry, I think I finished a book. And I don't care. Do you know what I mean? Like I might look at those 56 pages and write some more poems and add to that. And I might look at those 56 pages and take 6 pages out and then suddenly feel like, well, I don't have a book, but I'm close, so I better write toward more pages. But if I have 56 pages of poetry, I think, oh, I've written a book. Now I just need to put it in order. And in the process of putting it in order, you lose pages, or you say, there's a hole here, I need to write some more poems. But I don't try to fill the hole. I don't ever think, oh, I need to write a poem about X, or I need to write a poem about blank. I just think that's bad. I don't believe in that. That's good for other people. You know, Rita Dove wrote Thomas and Beulah that way. She's like, oh, here's the poem about this thing at this time, and now it's time to make it. And so she wrote it, and people like that book. Do you know what I'm saying? So that's not fun for me, and I like to be having a good time while I'm writing. You know, I don't like for things to be, I do like the fact of having a plan to write. Like I like a writing time, but I don't like knowing what I'm gonna do, or what I'm gonna say, or I don't like knowing how I'm gonna start. Does that make sense? I do like knowing what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna write. But ultimately when I write poems, I'm thinking much more about some matter of poetics than I am about a subject. For instance, when I was writing the tradition, I was thinking about the metonym and how I could employ the metonym. When I was writing the New Testament, I was thinking about lists. I was thinking about abstraction. I was thinking about what happens if you start a poem in abstraction. Do you know what I mean? How do you arrive at the concrete, or vice versa in that book? If I start a poem in the concrete, how do I arrive in the abstract? Like that? I mean, that's how I think about writing when I'm writing. Do you know? Like I think exactly what can consonants gain me? Like if I don't really know what's going on, but everything sounds the same, what do I get? Like that's what I'm thinking about, as opposed to thinking about the time I blank, like blow. Like that's, I'm not saying other people are good at that, but that's not my thing. I'll print out the 56 pages or so, because maybe by the time I realize I have 56, I have 59. Do you know what I mean? I'll print out the pages, and I pretty much just like to make a story. I like to make a thing in which certain elements get revealed over the course of the book. And as because elements get revealed, you have the feeling of story. You have the feeling. Arc is a great word. I just, It's not necessary. I mean, it is a word maybe I would use while teaching, but it's not a word I think of when I'm making a book. When I'm making a book, I think story, and I think, well, how do I mean, ultimately, to be quite honest with you, how do I turn these poems into a novel? And that has a lot to do with me ordering poems. And then other than that, it doesn't necessarily end up this way, but I think, what are the wildest of these 56 pages, or the strangest, or the strongest, or the most original? And I decide on 2 poems, and in the same way that I told you about what I do with lines, I take what I think of as the strangest and wildest, and I put it at the end, and I take the strangest and wildest and put it at the beginning, and second strangest and wildest and put it at the beginning, and I organize things associatively. And then I go back and see what I have, and then I work, until it fleshes out a story. The other thing that I do that has been very helpful, and very helpful to my students, I think, is, and other people that I've worked with on books, is I organize things from last line to title. So it's very hopefully hard, to put the book down. I think I'll give you an example of what I mean. So that you feel like you're in the same poem, even though your mind knows that you are changing poems. So I'll give you an example. In this book, The Tradition. The last line of the poem, The Tradition, is John Crawford, Eric Garner, Mike Brown. The title of the next poem is Hero, which associatively, particularly at that in that time of my life, is how I had to begin to think about these men in order to understand the Black Lives Matter movement as a whole. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. The last line of Hero is, thank God it can't get much darker than that. The title of the next poem is After Another Country, a book by James Baldwin. The last line of that poem is Of the Water. The title of the next poem is The Water Lilies. Mm-hmm. So quite literally moving not thinking so much about what the poems are about in order to make that order, but thinking, oh, if I have a word that is somehow leading into the next poem, then the reader will feel like reading the next poem. So that's part of what happens too. So everything I just said ends up in, oh, here, y'all can have it now. And now I have to fight you about a cover.
When I was going through the MFA, I feel like there was so much emphasis on collections of poetry, collecting the poems, and it sounds like you have a bone to pick with that way of maybe going about the work of poetry. Mm-hmm. Do we overvalue collections, and what do we lose by overvaluing the book in contrast to the poem itself?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a bone to pick. I can talk about, I know what you mean. Maybe I have a thing to say. I don't know if I have a bone to pick, because I think people ought to do what's working for them. Right. Do you know what I mean? I do want people to know that there are other options, is what's important. It's not that there's a bone to pick, it's that this idea of the arc, this idea of the book of poetry, it just is a little, it seems to me ahistorical in terms of how poems are actually used in the world. Poems are in the visor of your car. Poems are by the door that you walk out of every morning before you leave to go about your day. Poems are on your refrigerator. Poems are in the corner of the mirror above your dresser. That's how poems are used. And poems are in anthologies. And it's no shade, because when I'm when I'm trying to write a book, I'm trying to write a damn good book, and there are books of poetry I love. I love good book of poetry. What's better than a good book of poetry? Do you know what I mean? But just like I said earlier, the line is the unit. Then what's the unit to a book? A poem. I was on the, I think it was 2014, maybe 2015, it must have been 2015, because in 2014 I had a book out. So in 2015, I was on the National Book Award jury. And I just was frustrated with the fact that a lot of books had very clearly put the book before the poem, such that what I was reading was poetry, but not necessarily poems. And I didn't understand why that was happening to me. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what's wrong with poems. And I think I do think that definitely like in the late 2000s, the late 2000 teens, we were really in a world where, we're still like, everybody wants to write these books of prose poems with pictures in them and graphs. I'm not against that, you know? I just would like to know that you could write a line. I would like to know that that's a possibility for you. And maybe that's not, and that's cool. That doesn't mean that what you made isn't a poem. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But there's an option out there that actually is what we were all about, poems. And then suddenly people just weren't about that anymore. People were about, for a little while, maybe I less have an understanding of what's happening today, but for a little while, I just felt like people were about the book that was hybrid. The word hybrid was such an important word, had become like, you wasn't doing shit if you wasn't writing a hybrid thing. What is this? Is this a short story or a poem or what? Is this a nonfiction lyric essay? And like that was supposed to, get everybody wet. Do you know what I'm saying? And that just don't really turn, I get it. Like I've read those books and they were good. So I don't have a problem with the existence of that. And I love that people can try that like you try anything else. But then there's this other thing, and I don't want everybody to feel like you can't continue to try that too. Mm-hmm. And